Well, I hope you've enjoyed so far today. It's been great, I think. And we're going to end the day with a real kind of highlight. It's kind of a rare opportunity. You get a chance to interact with, have conversation with, ask some questions and get some feedback from four of our eminent social marketing gurus. There are, of course, challenges for people like me that organise these events about who do you ask to stand up here, because there's a good dozen other people in the audience who are social marketing gurus, but that would make the thing too unwieldy. So if you are a guru, and I know many of you are, please don't be offended that you're not sitting up here. It doesn't mean we don't value you. We love you and nurture you and want your contribution as part of this session. But there is some kind of thinking about the panel. Of course, we wanted a strong Canadian kind of perspective on this panel, and we have at least two Canadians on this panel, if not three. Or three. I didn't know how you wanted to classify yourself now, Alan, because Alan, of course, was born a Canadian and is now an American.
We're adopting her.
Okay. And of course, we wanted a balance of some of the kind of major, areas of interest. So health, but also environment, because of Doug. And I guess if there's a preeminent scholar, academic in terms of publishing books and deep thought, certainly Alan Andreasen is our kind of champion in that field. There is nobody more eminent than Alan in this field. And of course, we want gender balance. And my view is that Nancy Lee's worth three men anytime. So that's why Nancy, as well as being one of our key social marketing gurus, is here. I also know the word guru. I mean, it's a fabulous word. It's much better than kind of teacher, mentor, professor. But it kind of implies a kind of an eminence that I know, because they're all very modest people, that they wouldn't necessarily want to adopt. And that's part of why they are so good, because they are kind of real practitioners and thinkers in this field and leaders, but they're also learners in this field, as we all are. So thank you very much for taking part in this. It'll be a great session. And the way that we're going to do it is we've asked each of the kind of panelists today to think about a big mistake that they've made and reflect on the learning that they took from that. Of course, some of them have really struggled to think of a single mistake they've ever made in social marketing, because they are so bright, but they're going to share some kind of experience with us. What we'll do after each person, they've got about 5 minutes just to talk about that issue and what they learned. A couple of questions at that point, then we'll work our way through the panel, and that should give us at least half an hour, I would think, for some general Q&A. So please, this is a kind of rare opportunity. Do take this opportunity to raise issues, maybe thoughts that have been triggered in your mind today about some of the kind of big issues we've been discussing, or questions you'd like to put to specific panel members based on what they've said about their learning, or there might be a more general question to the whole panel, and I'll give you lots of opportunities to raise those questions. So, with your indulgence and the panel, if you're ready, Jim, do you want to kick off for us?
Thank you very much. Well, mistakes. I've made a few, but like most of you, I haven't had any career-ending mistakes, not in my social marketing career. And, like I haven't had a new Coke or a Ford Edsel or that creepy Burger King guy, or launching a product like AIDS diet candy in the 1980s when AIDS crisis just hit North America. You could just sort of be sympathetic to those people. But first, I need to give you some context. Our team in Health Canada started social marketing, as I mentioned earlier, in the early 80s, when social marketing was still at the theoretical academic concept, at least here in Canada. And I believe we were the first major national organization to run a significant social marketing campaign in Canada, not including, of course, the participation folks. I think my colleague Francois Lagarde is going to do a presentation tomorrow morning that's going to explain all of this, right? Right. So our first major social marketing program was called the Generation of Non-Smokers campaign, run in the early 80s. Now, this program was the first truly integrated planned social marketing program we ran at Health Canada. And the first phase included a series of, the old multimedia messages and promoting a positive self-image of non-smokers. The campaign theme was, you ready for this one? A broken cigarette is a little freedom gained. Interesting. Sounds better in French. Anyway, and the goal was to produce a generation of non-smoking Canadians. The Generation program portrayed non-smoking as an attractive alternative to help teens resist the pressure to smoke, and it stressed the fact that smokers are in the minority in Canada, and it spoke to teens in their own terms, never preaching and never saying don't smoke. The program had the full menu, from a full campaign to peer counseling programs in schools, upstream regulations in schools, community-based programs. This is 1981-82, guys. And significant involvement with youth groups, program across the country, and the initiation of a monitoring program to measure youth tobacco in Canada. So that was a long time ago. But it even got better, because then we continued our efforts and we developed this program called Break Free, which is well known here in Canada. And again, it was another anti-smoking program that we developed, again, using the similar techniques that we used for the previous campaign. And again, making smoking a socially unacceptable behavior and influencing group peer pressure. And we did a lot of things. We did all kinds of promotions. And yes, we used Canadian entertainers. At that time, there was no Justin Bieber here in Canada, thank you. But I don't know if I would have wanted to use Justin. I mean, I'm a very proud Canadian, and I know he's a proud Canadian, but I'm not so sure right now that he'd be a good one. But we did use stars, and it was, it's kind of interesting in developing these campaigns. We would really check these people out. It was quite interesting. Maybe I'll write a book one day and tell you how we actually checked them out. You wouldn't want to know this. But anyways, we also use sports heroes, Canada, like our friends to the south are sports nuts, hockey especially, of course. And we wanted to equate smoking with such qualities as charisma, stardom, leadership, and having a positive self-concept. Now, again, this is 80s talk, guys, so I just want you to understand where I'm coming from. So in developing these programs, we focus mostly on 2 Ps, promotion and place distribution, as my colleagues and I did not see the relevance of product and price in our social marketing initiative. Now, how am I ever going to live that one down? I'll never know. But it's hard to believe that we made this incredible mistake. And in my view, it was a major strategic error, but we were relatively new to social marketing at the time. And in addition, we published an article on our social marketing program and presented it at the Second World Congress on Tobacco in Tokyo in 1988, where our paper stated that the focus of social marketing should be much more focused on the 2 Ps. By the way, if anyone ever comes across that paper, please shred or burn it, please. And if there's anybody here from Tokyo, I didn't leave any copies there. So, of course, today I am, for those who know me, of course, I am the strongest advocate for the 4 Ps of social marketing, and feel very strongly that while social marketing integrates many characteristics common to other forms of behavior change, one core principle remains truly unique to social marketing: the 4 Ps of marketing. The 4 Ps are where it's at, and it represents the fundamental building blocks of social marketing. And as my good friend Nancy Lee pointed out in Dublin, it's here to stay. So I would just add one little thing. Let's keep it to 4 Ps. And I'm getting a little tired. I run this course at Carleton University, and I had 4 professors presenting. And one day the students came to me and said, "Jim, you say there's 4 Ps. The last professor that came into our room said there were 6 Ps. The other one said there were 8 Ps. How many Ps are there?" So I actually did a little research, and I found out these are the other Ps: people, publics, partnerships, participation, policy, performance, proposition, process, positioning, philosophy, perspective, planning, and packaging. Peter Piper picked and the list goes on. So the bottom line is there's 4 Ps are the key, and we don't need to start adding tons of Ps. Passion, well, that I agree with. But the only reason I say that is because I have a hard enough time teaching the 4 Ps. But anyway, that's my story, and clearly that was a biggie in my mistake department. But I'm happy to now plead in front of a confession in front of 500 people my big mistake. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, any direct questions at that point to Jim?
Oh,
Yeah.
I know. My friend from Australia was going
Can
to
we,
ask me
is
a
there
question.
anybody with a roving mic? Yep. Okay. Can we get one down here?
Thank you very much for your honesty in sharing that with us. I wanted to just ask you a little bit more about this mistake, because your mistake is a deliberate strategy for many of the organisations that we work with, in terms of they are set up to be communications units and they focus on how to create the best possible communications and ignore any other Ps. So could you shed some light on how you transformed from that view to a 4P view, and what we could all do to try to get that change?
I'm happy you brought this up. One of the great things that we were able to do in social marketing, and thanks mostly to people at this table, and of course Dr. Kotler, is I and my staff and I, we went to, I can't tell you, just every single social marketing event in the United States, Canada, we were there. I was involved, of course, with some of these people in the Innovations of Social Marketing Conference that ran for 9 or 10 years. Also had the chance to work in Australia and spend some time with Laurie and those people. And I think what happened was we started to learn that product and price in some cases are even more important than promotion and place in some specific cases. And it's by learning, reading books, educating ourselves, talking to the experts. I can remember spending time with Bill Novelli, and him spending hours with me over drinks, telling me everything I needed to know. So it was by learning, and the reason I raised that is there are more senior people here, and we should be spending a lot of our time educating people, because you're absolutely right. As a consultant now, I see a lot of organizations, frankly, who are, never mind 2 Ps, we got 1 P, and it's promotion and communications. And I think I said enough about that on my debate, in the debate piece, so I don't want to say any more except to say that is really tragic. And my job, and the job that we have, and the people at this table, is try to convince people that there's more than 1 P to marketing, and there are 4 Ps, and teach them how to use it. Thank you.
Great. Another question. Anybody? Okay.
Good.
Doug.
Just before I start my comments about my most woeful story, I want to mention that I bet everyone else at this table that I, in fact, had the most woeful story. So after we're done, after Nancy's finished, we're going to be asking each of you to vote about who has the worst story. And I'm pretty confident I have the worst story. So let me tell you about my PhD thesis, which led into the worst project I ever delivered. My PhD thesis was investigating why people get active on global issues. And I got interested in this by experience that I had when I was a student at the University of Waterloo. I spent a lot of my time in the evenings and the weekends attending meetings that were organized by different organizations and agencies in the region of Waterloo. And I quickly saw something that I think that probably each of you have seen as well. I saw the same people at meeting after meeting after meeting. And while these were presented as being public meetings, they really weren't. They were meetings that were essentially organized by different agencies, but attended by the same cohort. And that cohort was becoming much more knowledgeable about global issues, but they really weren't public in any true sense of the word. And so my PhD thesis was around trying to figure out, why is that the case? Why is it that we're not seeing the true public come out? Why is it that we have this small group of individuals who are basically self-educating themselves? And I made use of a theory in psychology. It's called the two-process model of stress and coping. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a really interesting model of looking at behavior. It was proposed by Susan Folkman and Richard Lazarus, and they wrote a book in 1980 by the same title. And again, if you're not familiar with it, really interesting read. And this model suggests that whenever people encounter a new event, they do 2 things. They first appraise the event, and they go through what they call primary appraisal. They essentially ask themselves the question, what's this meaning of this event for me? And a person can decide that it's benign, that it's a threat, or it's a challenge. And when it's benign, they don't go on to do anything about it. But when it's either a threat or challenge, they have to find out how they're going to address this event. When they go on to secondary appraisal, they ask themselves the simple question, what can I actually do about this? And it turns out that people's sense of efficacy has a strong impact upon whether or not they use what Lazarus and Folkman call either problem-focused coping or emotion-focused coping. And people who have a sense of efficacy over the particular issue will spend their time and they'll put their effort into trying to solve whatever this problem is. For those that don't have a sense of efficacy, instead they deal with emotions that are caused by whatever's threatening or challenging them. And so my students, for example, when they were writing exams, if they didn't have a sense of efficacy, they would clean their closets, they would call home, etc. You know, people use emotion-focused coping when they don't feel that they've got control over the particular issue. So I thought this was a pretty interesting model to potentially apply to think about why is it that the public's not coming out to public meetings. And if you look at it from this two-step process, the first question we'd ask is, do they perceive that different global issues are a threat? Well, if they don't, they're not likely to come out to public meetings. If they do perceive that these issues are a threat, then they've got to go on to secondary appraisal, and they have to be in the camp that believes that they can actually do something about it. So my PhD thesis was studying whether or not those two variables were important predictors of people getting active on global issues. And it turns out they're very predictive of people getting active on global issues. But it's not quite this way that Lazarus and Folkman talked about. It turns out that when we look at global issues, people's perceptions of efficacy really are rooted in collective efficacy. They have to have this perception that in working in conjunction with other people, the work that I'm doing matters. So here's the conundrum that I had as a graduate student. I was doing work in this area, and I really perceived myself as being sort of an academic / social activist. So I was thinking, well, how do you make use of this? And what I was interested in is, could we get more people to start attending public meetings, getting involved in local groups, et cetera? And along with other friends of mine who also were graduate students at the time at the University of Waterloo, we decided we were going to create this national organization in Canada. None of us had any funding. None of us had done anything like this before. And none of us really had any sense of how we'd go about organizing this. But the first thing we decided to do was to organize a bike ride across Canada. So in the middle of my graduate studies, I rode across Canada, and we raised a little over $100,000 on that ride. And we used that money along with governmental grants that we were able to obtain to set up a clearinghouse in Toronto. And that clearinghouse collected information about agencies working on global issues all across the country. And what we were intending to do was to use the money that we'd raised from the from the ride and other work that we'd done to run a series of radio ads. And we actually were able to arrange with Ogilvy to have Ogilvy produce a set of radio ads for us. And they produced 7 different ads. And we aired those ads in 1987, the fall of 1987. This was, by the way, about 3 years of work for us. Most of us worked 30, 40 hours a week on top of being graduate students to get all of this in place. Each of these ads carried along with it a 1-800 number that people could call into. We had a bank of phones and lots of people who were both hired staff as well as volunteers to basically answer these phone calls when people called in. After 3 years of working on this, and these ads were designed very specifically to deal with both the threat as well as getting people to feel they had a sense of collective efficacy. After 3 years of working on this, we were expecting tens of thousands of calls. We didn't get tens of thousands of calls, we didn't get thousands of calls, we didn't even get hundreds of calls. We got 8 phone calls. And I'm pretty sure this should win the drink from these 3 other people. Now, for me, the moral of the story is don't skip the pilot. If we...
Very good.
If we had pilot tested this and any Canadian community on a small scale, we would have known this wasn't going to work. We might have gone back to Ogilvy and read on the ads. We might have put the money into quite different type of campaign, but we didn't do that. And I want to suggest to you that I think that's one of the largest problems that social marketers fall into. We're under a lot of political pressure and time pressure to go straight from audience research to development of strategies to broad-scale implementation. And social marketing is littered with examples of programs that have failed. Large, multi-million-dollar programs that have not brought about behavioral change. So every time I think about working with someone and they think about skipping the pilot, I always reflect back upon that example when I was in graduate school.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Did your mother call?
Okay, any questions for Doug? And you're very brave to admit that, I'll tell you. Yeah, about piloting or anything else? Nope, okay. Alan?
Doug lets me also add to that example that I was told. I wasn't involved in it, but it was apparently some folks looking at getting women to get mammograms. And the way the story was told to me was basically the committee involved in this was populated by a lot of doctors and so on. And they sat around, what do we do next? We're having sort of flat mammography levels, 50% or some such. And the discussion went around to, well, there are risk factors that increase a woman's chance of getting breast cancer. And they went through all of, the sort of listing them, came up with 8, as I recall. And the idea was do a campaign, sort of do a benchmark of how many of these risk factors did the target audience know, and they did that. And then they ran the campaign. Came back, number of risk factors went up a lot, and then I always ask my class, what do you think happened to the levels of mammography? And what I give them is the option is sort of went up as much as the awareness went up a little bit at that level, stayed pretty flat. What do you think? And I could do that with you. But the answer was it went down, okay? And the reason it went down was the women who were going to get mammograms said, oh, look at those factors. I don't have those. I don't need a mammogram. And it was a terrific example of why one needs pre-testing. Anyway, sorry. That isn't what I was planning to talk about. When I thought about this challenge for today of sort of mistakes, I said, as I said to some of my colleagues, I don't have any sort of horror stories. But the question sort of is if it got me thinking about sort of is what my role is in all of this world. And one of the things I suppose that I've seen as my role is sort of thinking about where the whole field ought to go. And that's why in the middle 1990s, I sort of focused on this behavior change stuff because I was worried, as a lot of people were, about the fact it was too much communication driven, and the health communication people were really upset and threatened and all of that because we were doing the same thing. So I made a lot of push about the change thing as what we are all about, changing behavior, influencing behavior. And then later on is sort of this upstream stuff that a lot of you know about. But when I think lately about sort of where the field really ought to go and what I should have, I suppose, been thinking about more over the last 10 years is the science behind the field. I mean, a lot of what I hear today and throughout this conference, and a lot of the conferences I go to, are presentations about the way to do social marketing in the field. The approaches to be used, the frameworks to be used, the sort of principles, the 4 Ps, and so on. But 2 things. We've said all along that our field, or at least I've said a lot, and a lot of the definitions are involved in, we borrow stuff from the private sector and apply to these social problems. And we try to say that we really have an affinity with the basic field of marketing. And I think one of the things I've begun to do lately is to go back to the basic field of marketing and try to find ways in which we are more integrated in what they do and in their research. Because I've argued that really, in a lot of things, you may have even read that, I've argued that we're all about influencing behavior. Lots of cases influencing non-behavior, in the sense we don't want people to do things. In other cases, influencing behavior. And I've tried, in a sense, to get the marketing community, with no success, I suppose that's one measure of failure, I suppose, but no lack of success in trying to develop a definition of marketing that is holistic and that just doesn't treat nonprofit marketing or social marketing as this sort of funny exception down in kind of one corner of the field. And that's related to the second issue, which I've been pushing them, is try to think about maybe we should be promoting a lot of research within the field of marketing that combines work in the social field that you all work in and the traditional field that brand researchers and consumer behavior researchers work in. So I've written some stuff lately about talking about generic types of behavior and sort of said, well, we're interested in getting people to change behavior. So are they. We're interested in getting people not to change behavior, and so are they. And we want people to switch behaviors and so on, and I'm more elaborate than this. But my point is in part to move back to the core discipline, and I don't think I've done enough of this, and I think about the future of the field, that we ought to do more to integrate what we do, not just tell ourselves, here's a better way to do what we do, but try to enfold the people who study and teach about marketing in the basic marketing field with us, and that we're not this oddity off to one side. And I think there can be a lot learned for both sides if we, in fact, look at some of these issues that are, I would argue, more generic across fields. The related second thing I'll mention is that one of the things that happens that is common in the basic marketing field, and I think of my own department at Georgetown, is we're filled with lots of people who are consumer behavior researchers. And you think, well, what do they do? And should we be mimicking what they do? Well, a lot of them do is a lot of behavioral modeling. They're very interested in a sense, the micro of the processing that goes between message elements and input elements and so on, and the way people think about it and process it. We don't study that enough. You may be doing a lot of this, but where I've come to say is, and I mentioned it to several people, I think one of the things that we need in this field is more scientific target audience research. We ought to have a foundation that supports academic research in schools of business, schools of public health, that supports this basic research, not on kind of what campaign element would work best, but what can we understand about people that we think ought to be people who should change, and what goes through their heads when they encounter various elements that we might like to put in our campaigns. That we are not a field, I'm afraid, at this point, and in a sense, that's one of my regrets, and I suppose I'm partly responsible for this. We don't fund, we don't get grants, we don't have our clients, we don't have the agencies represented here supporting an academic research center. We ought to have one. I don't know how you do that, and that's one of the things that I'm not very good at, but I would like to use this occasion as one to urge us collectively to think about that, and if any of you is in the room who have some sort of mechanisms in which we might advance this fundamental idea, certainly email me. So, thank you.
So the fundamental research question. Yeah, okay. Any points or questions to Alan about that you'd like to raise? Okay. Nancy, thank you.
So my biggest mistake was not knowing that they were going to videotape when I was dancing, because that is like, oh my gosh.
Wait till your grandkids see.
Oh, I know. So I'm going to preface this with saying that research is really one of my passions, marketing research. When I got out of graduate school, I spent 3 years in a research firm because it just leads to so many incredible ideas and inspiration that without that, I never know what to do. So when Seattle Public Utilities approached me to help consult on rain barrels, they wanted to have a rain barrel campaign where they had bought 1,500 rain barrels, and they wanted the city citizens that lived in the city of Seattle to come on a one day on a Saturday to come get a rain barrel and to buy a rain barrel. And so we were basically working as a work group, and we were really nervous because not only the head of the Seattle Public Utilities, but the mayor was watching and saying, no, this rainwater harvesting stuff, is this really going to work? So you guys, what are you going to do with all those rain barrels if nobody comes? So we were really scared. So I'm going to preface it with that. So then what we did was we did a survey of 800 households in Seattle. And there are about 150,000 that are within the city limit. And we did a survey of 800 households, and it was very intriguing that 2/3 of them said they really loved the idea of rainwater harvesting. I mean, we get all this rain, how about we catch it, and we put it into things, and then we use it for things like deck plants. So 2/3 of the people thought it was a great idea. But we didn't know how to price it, so then we asked some pricing questions. And at $80, which was about the going retail rate, 5% of households said they were likely to come and buy a rain barrel. 5% at $80. At $50, it was 15%. And at $30, it was about 30%. So we had some real price elasticity, meaning the lower the price, the more people that were going to come. At least that should have dawned on us. So here we were, though, still really scared. And what we decided we would do was price it at $29.95. Now remember, at $29.95, we had 1,500 rain barrels. If the research were really accurate, 25% of people would show up, that would be $37,000. Well, I wasn't worried because it was like a one-day only sale, and it was in a park that was kind of off I-5 and hard to get to. So given that we thought the price was probably okay, we thought we've got to get into this promotion thing. And we started promoting that these were Greek olive barrels, and Seattle's kind of green, and they love these reused olive barrels. And then we got this great master gardener who's a celebrity for the radio shows in Seattle named Cisco, and we paid him to do some advertising for us, and we paid ads. And then, as it turned out, the Seattle Times thought this was a really cool thing. They heard we were doing this. And so the Sunday before the Saturday sale, they did a front page on the lifestyle section of the newspaper. Well, it's sort of good, but the sale started at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and I drove up there, and at the entrance at 9:15, they were sold out. They estimated 5,000 cars were idling waiting to get there before they found out that the barrels were sold out. 5,000. So 5,000 people estimated showed up for these 1,500 rain barrels. And the next day, the mayor, he had to do a press release for rain checks for the next time we did a rain barrel, that those who idled would be able to get a rain barrel. And so here's the moral of my story. You gotta pay attention to that research. There was real interest. Why we priced it at 30 was because we were scared. We should have let the research guide our pricing strategy. And then one other thing we ended up doing the next time around, because I love learning from lessons, which is what Phil always tells me, marketers try things, and when they don't work, you learn from them and you do better the next time. So the next time what we did was we had people register online for them ahead of time, and when we ran out, we would let them know. So that's my story. It's all about the research and believing it, or letting it at least guide you.
Okay, any questions for Nancy? No. We've obviously kind of beaten you into submission today, haven't you? Kicked the life out of you. Okay, so, well, we've got a few minutes now. A good 10. Oh, the vote. Okay, yeah, you want... Okay. Well, who votes for Doug's story being the most dramatic and terrible? Okay, you win. Okay. So yeah, well, this is a rare opportunity. It's not going to happen every day in your working life. Any questions or points you'd like to make to any or all of the panel at this point about lessons learned, challenges you face? Yeah. Can we just get a mic here, and then we'll come to you. Yeah.
When I applied for funding to come to this conference, my professor, head of school, said, social marketing, that's not mainstream, it's marginal. I don't know that I should even provide money for you to come. I appreciate what you say, but I think that we've got a long way to go before traditional marketers give us any credibility at all. I've been at this a long time, and it's still a struggle to even get to come to a conference like this.
Any reaction to that?
Well, no, I mean, I certainly agree with you. I mean, I tried for, I was president of a thing called the Association for Consumer Research in 1992, and made the case that the field ought to embrace this kind of stuff. And it's very hard to get in a business school context, and it may be easier in other contexts, in public health programs and elsewhere. Although I think in some sense that's too bad, because like you, I think if we borrow from the field of marketing, we ought to partner with the field of marketing in doing fundamental research on what will get people to do things, not just buy products and use services and so on, but that will get them to do things that will make their lives better, or in the case of their environment, make the environment better. That there's fundamental stuff that we need to find ways to promote, and sometimes that's money. I mean, in my world, you get research because people, in a sense, support it, either in an institute that lets people do kind of fundamental things, not knowing quite where it goes, or applied research. But I'd like to see more of the fundamental stuff that I don't see happening.
Great. Yeah. Nancy?
Two thoughts. The first one is that I wish that you would keep close at hand about 3 to 5 success stories, that you could quickly say, social marketing has done the following 3 things, and real numbers and accountability for it to demonstrate the value. And the second thing is, approach it just like we would a customer and find out what their barriers are. What would actually change their mind that they would then want to fund this? What would need to happen that they would want to say yes? So I think some good formative research, even with your upstream market, would be a suggestion.
Okay. Great. Was there a question here? Yeah.
The question for Doug. Did you guys ever do an evaluation as to why you only got 8 calls?
We were too heartbroken. Yeah, there could be lots of explanations. The 1-800 number may not have been good enough mnemonic. There might have not been enough exposure. Lots of different reasons. Right?
If I could just add one thing, I'm a big, some of the colleagues, people here have been to my workshop on Sunday, and I'm the strongest proponent of pilot testing.
Yes.
And I cannot tell you, talk about big mistakes, I can't agree with you, I couldn't agree with you more about the fact that you should have pilot tests. I think I see so many examples of organizations who roll out the whole darn program, and all of a sudden they realize that the thing is a dud. And I'm at a point in my life now, when I work with my clients, I don't ask them if they think it's a good idea to do pilot testing. I tell them they're doing pilot testing. I order them to do pilot testing because that's exactly what can happen.
Jeff, can I add to that?
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time, as I'm sure many of you do as well, thinking about, where is it that we get traction, where do we not get traction with aspects of social marketing? And when I'm doing workshops and training, I talk about community-based social marketing is there are 5 steps: careful behavior selection, doing bearing benefit research, development of strategies, pilot testing, and then finally broad-scale implementation. And I think what's really intriguing is that 3 of those 5 steps get missed all the time. No rigorous behavior selection. People come to the table with preordained ideas of which behaviors they want to go after. They presume that they know the barriers. And these are people who've worked in the field often for a very long period of time, and they have a very clear sense of why people are engaged or not engaged in whatever the behavior or behaviors are that they wish to promote. And I think what's intriguing about that is Mark Snyder at the University of Minnesota has done research around the confirmatory bias, and what he's found very clearly is when people have presumptions of why people are doing something or not doing something, they tend to look for information that confirms what they already believe, and they become even more confirmed to that. And that's a real barrier for us to get people to do bearing benefit research. What they grab onto, interestingly, is the 3rd step in community-based social marketing of utilizing tools and methodologies from social marketing or from the social sciences. And then they go to the 5th step of broad-scale implementation. And I think one of the real questions that we need to spend a lot of time talking about is how do we get behavior selection to be done much more frequently? How do we get bearing benefit research to be done, which I think is a lot of what Ellen was talking about. So how do we get foundations, other agencies support universities and other institutions doing that work? And then how do we ensure that we get the 4th step of having the pilot testing be done before? Because there's a lot of political ramifications for people doing community-based social marketing. And I don't think we've addressed those as well enough as we could in order to be able to get better traction.
Great. Yeah, can we go here first, then we'll come here.
Hi. Dan and Chip here, some of know, will know them because of their book Switch, with well-known social marketers. They have written a book about decision-making organizations and at individual level, named Decisive. One of the techniques they recommended, I think is very appropriate for this discussion, is the idea of making mistakes on purpose. List your key assumptions about your object of action, maybe the social marketing issue we're facing, for instance, and analyze each of these assumptions and see which one would render the greater payoff if proven mistaken. So I always recommend this in the agency I work. Let's make mistakes, but in small scale. That is, let's run pilots, let's question our assumptions, because this is a very, very scarce literature on cognitive repairs. Organizations, individuals, and societies, we are all ridden with biases and several cognitive limitations. So I think we should not be afraid of mistakes, but we should strive for a process to account for them. In order to make mistakes and learn for them, because we're always prone to make them all the time, but only on hopefully in small scale.
Okay, great point. Any kind of reaction? Yeah.
Just 2 quick responses to that. The first is one of the strategies that I often use when I'm working with agencies that are committed to what psychologists call information-intensive campaigns, or what many of us are seeing as being media campaigns, is to say to them, let's use social marketing, but let's compare that to an information-only control, so that we've got these 2 things being juxtaposed against each other. We can see which of those is most cost-effective. And I often find that's a very useful strategy to get social marketing in the door. They're committed, they think that what they're doing right now is likely changing behavior. Well, let's test that, and let's test that against strategies that are more likely to be effective in changing behavior. And I've often found that very helpful. The second thing that I think is intriguing is what level of complexity do we try to build into pilots? And I think one of the things that we have to sort of come to grips with is that most of the time we do not know why our programs are effective. We know whether or not we've changed behavior, but we often don't know what are the actual program elements have contributed to that actual success. And I think one of the things we need to step back on is say, when is it important for us to do orthogonal designs in which we can break out particular program elements and see what that's contributing to our overall success, and when is it not? And in my mind, at least, it's when a particular element of a program is really expensive to deliver. So I was at a session this morning which they were talking about infrastructure for biking, for example. You know, well, if we're going to put infrastructure in and we're going to separate out parts of laneways for cycling, that's a very expensive, you know, program design element. Well, you could break that out as an orthogonal design and say, we're going to have some pilot conditions in which that's part of what we do, and others in which we're not doing that. And we're looking specifically to see what additional changes we see in behavior. And I think we need to start being able to do more sophisticated pilots to allow us to be able to work out in cases like that, whichever program elements are really worthwhile to be building in to broad-scale imputation.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. We had a question
Yep,
here.
I just wanted to just share something with you guys, and especially Alan. I think what's different for me coming to Canada and coming to these social marketing conferences is many of the speakers come from the academic world, and your conversations are around your theories and your evidence and your models. And as a CEO of a market research and social research company in Australia, from a practitioner perspective, I can tell you that the theories and models and writings that you guys have all done over the last 20 or 30 years has helped my organisation to be successful with our clients, and that we have more interest from our commercial clients in our social marketing models and approaches than we do from our social clients. And so you're putting the theory and the rigour and the science back into marketing. So I think you guys should be patting yourselves on the back and looking at the opportunity to contribute back to the general commercial marketing field, because I think you're ahead of their game.
That's worth a clap, I think, isn't it?
Nice.
Thanks for that point.
Nice.
I just like to make a response to this. We have a situation in our country, this is Canada here, wonderful federal government, where they've cut back marketing research, public opinion research by about 70%. If you talk to any, I'm sure you know marketing research companies in Canada. If you had a chance to speak to any of them, they would tell you about the challenges in the marketplace that we have in federal government. So many of my colleagues in the federal government, in all the many departments and agencies, want to do much more, obviously, marketing research, public opinion research, and all that, and they're forbidden to do it. And we have programs that are run, and I see them every day, with virtually no research, because the government has decided that research is expendable and not really required. And we're having our conference next month, our big national marketing conference here in Ottawa. Needless to say, that comes up virtually at every conference. And so I wish I could say that we're winning the battle here, but we're not. We're losing the battle big time. And it just on a personal note, a number of marketing research companies have had to cut their staff by 50% as a result of it. So I just thought I'd let you know about that wonderful treat of Canada here.
Yeah, let me also reflect on that. And yeah, we've done a lot, I think, on the academic side to advance things. But I think we need academics, I guess, at least, to sort of think of the big questions that we haven't really delved into that require some fairly deep research. One of them is how do we study people that we don't want to change? I mean, most of the examples here today and even in this session and earlier is about getting people to change, and how do we track people who've changed, and how do we figure out, why they did what they did. But there's a lot of stuff like smoking and drugs and beating up your wife or girlfriend or whatever that we want people not to do. Do we know anything about that? Is it the same as trying to get somebody to begin to do something? There are social behaviors that are important socially and societally. We ought to be looking at, sort of the fundamental science behind campaigns designed to influence those behaviors. And that's, I think, the next big thing that the field ought to do, if we only had some money.
So study more skinny people who go to buffets. Yeah, I could do that. I'm going to bring this session to an end now. Just to remind you, those of you that are going to the networking party tonight, if you're not booked into that and you want to go, you can still book in. It's at 7 o'clock. It's in the kind of the reception area here and the exhibition area. There is a lot of food there, so you probably don't need to eat or plan to eat if you're coming to that. And there's drinks as well. Actually, and also just to remind you all, you all have membership of the Institute of International Social Marketing Association. Their AGM is taking place at the end of this meeting in room Pier 2. So if you'd like to go along to that and find out a bit more about the ISMA, please do that. Can you help me thank the panelists today? Absolutely fantastic end to the day.